Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, or should we wait for Representative Raskin to log on?
I think we should begin.
Okay. Buenas noches y bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides. Good evening and welcome to Voices Our Future, a conversation with Representatives Joaquin Castro and Jamie Raskin. The dialogue will be facilitated by Our Lady of the Lake student leaders who will relay questions to the representatives previously gathered from the campus community. Our conversation today will focus on their experiences serving in Congress, the pressing issues our communities are facing, and how we can stay engaged in the political process in our currently politically divisive times. This event is sponsored by the Center for Mexican American Studies and Research and the Student Government Association. I am Dr. Villarreal, Associate Professor and Program Head of the Comparative Mexican American Studies program. I also serve as the Director of the Research Center. The center is dedicated to drawing on our expertise here at OLLU as a Hispanic serving institution, steeped in the rich Mexican culture and history of San Antonio's West Side. The mission of CSR is to provide intellectual leadership and resources to support the development and dissemination of knowledge about the histories, cultures, and contributions of Mexican Americans, broadly defined, with an emphasis on the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. It is a privilege and a great honor to host Representatives Castro and Raskin this evening. Before we begin our program, I would like to remind attendees and participants or panelists to stay muted while others are talking. Attendees are muted right now, but you're encouraged to use the chat function to comment throughout the presentation. We invite you to post questions for our guests, and I'll do my best to relay our comments to the panelists. We are also live streaming this event on our Facebook page. It's the OLLU Center for Mexican American Studies and Research Facebook page. So those of you who are joining us on Facebook are welcome to use the comment section to post your questions. The live recording of this event will be available for viewing on Facebook for at least a month following its conclusion. So if you know people who missed it, they can watch it there. I'm also happy to send them a YouTube link. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce Ms. Janie Barrera, a member of the OLLU Board of Trustees, to give the official welcome tonight to our guests and attendees. Ms. Barrera is the founding president and chief executive officer of Lift Fund, a nonprofit organization that provides loans and management training to entrepreneurs of all kinds. She has dedicated her professional life to the field of microfinance and helping individuals and small businesses thrive. Ms. Barrera has received nationwide recognition for her accomplishments, including a federal appointment to the President's Advisory Council on Financial Capability under former President Barack Obama. So, Jamie, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Villarreal. I want to welcome you all on behalf of the Our Lady of the Lake Board of Trustees and President Diane Melby, who could not be with us here today. She asked me to send her regrets and to let you know how much she appreciates you spending this time with our community. Today, we are thrilled to have Representatives Castro and Raskin. We are grateful that you are taking this time to engage with our students and educating them on how they can get involved in the political process. Engaging in the political process is one of the most important ways we can advance social justice issues. Our Lady of the Lake University was built on a heritage of promoting social justice. This comes from our founders, the Sisters of Divine Providence. Let me share with you some of the pivotal events, organizations, and social justice champions that have roots here on this campus at this university. They include the first School of Social Work in Texas and the Southwest that was created in 1942. The Historic Commission on Civil Rights Hearings of Mexican Americans in the Southwest, that took place right here in 1968. The The Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities was formed on this campus in 1986. And Our Lady of the Lake University alumna whose political activism was shaped on this campus in the early 1970s, Rosie Castro, who went on to become one of the first Mexican-American women to run for San Antonio city government and helped found the Raza Unida Party. She also raised Representative Castro and his brother, former HUD Secretary Julian Castro. We are excited to add another chapter to our social justice history tonight with this event. Representatives, thank you so much for taking the time to engage with our students who are our future. Representatives, let me introduce you now to Madison Polashek, a senior here at the University of Lake University and the president of the Student Government Association. Madison, I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Trustee Barrera. I'm so excited for us to have this event tonight. My name is Madison Polashek, and like Ms. Barrera said, I am the Student Government Association president, and I'm your MC for tonight. I'm so hyped up for everyone to get into these questions, get started, and having a good time. I'm a senior here at Our Lady of the Lake. I major in criminology and criminal justice and with a minor in forensics. This is my last year, and as this is the ending of my presidency, so I'm excited to get this event started. Now, to pass on, I will go ahead and start with passing it on to our students. Our students are going to start, and when we ask that everyone starts in the chat, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave it in the chat. We'll address you and we'll get to you, we promise. And so if anyone has anything else, we're ready to move on, and let's go ahead and go get this started. All righty, I'll pass it on to Eva.
Hello, I am Eva Salinas, and I am an undergraduate student and a political science major here at Our Lady of the Lake University. I am a sophomore, and I'm beyond honored to participate in this event. I would like to introduce our distinguished guest, Representative Joaquin Castro, a San Antonio native raised on the West Side and a second-generation Mexican-American. Representative Castro graduated with honors from Stanford University and attended Harvard Law School, where he received his Juris Doctor degree. His experienced career in politics and legislation started when he was elected to the Texas legislature. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a representative for Texas' 20th Congressional District, and he serves in the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, as well as the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Education and Labor Committee. He also most recently served as impeachment manager in the impeachment trial. Representative Castro joins us to discuss his career as a congressman and his commitment to the city he represents, San Antonio. Representative, we appreciate you setting some time aside despite your busy schedule. Thank you for joining us.
I think you're muted.
Did you want me to say a few words now, or did you want to introduce Jamie as well?
Oh, great. Go ahead. I apologize, Representative. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No. Well, first of all, thank you all for the invitation to join the OLLU community. And it's very special for me for a few reasons. First, I was born and raised on the west side of town, not too far from the university. But as Trustee Barrera mentioned, it's also the alma mater of my mom, Rosie, who graduated from there, I want to say in 1970 or 71. So it's a very special place for us and for our family. And I'm especially excited to be here tonight with Jamie Raskin, who is my colleague, representative from Maryland, and also somebody who did a wonderful job as a lead impeachment manager in the Senate trial that all of us went through not too long ago. And so I look forward to this conversation and to taking y'all's questions and to being able to do that with Jamie tonight.
Thank you, Representative Castro. Hello, my name is Rogelio Pacheco, and I am a political science major here at Our Lady of the Lake University, and I am honored to participate in today's event. I want to introduce our distinguished guest, Representative Jamie Raskin. Congressman Raskin is a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Representative Raskin was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District in 2017, and he is currently serving his third term on the Judiciary, House Oversight, and House Administration Committees, and is serving his second term on the Rules Committee and the Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus Crisis. He was also the lead impeachment manager in the Senate trial, and it was a constitutional law professor at American University. Representative Raskin joins us to discuss what it's like to be a politician and answer community questions. Welcome, Congressman Raskin.
Okay, I think Representative Raskin joined us, but he may not be a panelist. So we may need a moment to get that determined. So we may want to move forward with the first question for Representative Castro.
All right, everyone. So when we're moving on to the questions, once Representative Raskin comes back, we'll go ahead and give him some time. For now, we're going to move on to the first person, which is Rosa. Rosa's going to give her introduction, and then she'll be the start of the questions. Rosa, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Madison. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Representatives Castro and Raskins, for meeting with us today. My name is Rosa Hernandez. I am an undergraduate student in criminal justice and sociology. I am also the president of the Criminal Justice Society and director of civic engagement for the Student Government Association here at Our Lady of the Lake University. We will now begin with our first question, which is directed to both representatives. What motivated you to run for office and pursue a career in politics? If Representative Castro, you could start the question, and then Raskins will follow.
No, well, I grew up in a family that was very involved in grassroots politics. Both my parents, my mom and my dad, were involved in the Mexican-American civil rights movement in San Antonio and in the Southwest. So, I grew up believing that when government works right, it can help create opportunity in people's lives. And I still believe that today. And so early on, I learned about the value of government, the value of participating and being involved, and of course, the value of voting. And I served 10 years in the state legislature. I got elected when I was 28 years old. And then, of course, 10 years later, was elected to Congress. And I'm still proud to represent San Antonio in the House of Representatives. And, you get asked often when you're in politics, like why you're in politics. In other words, why didn't you choose another career as a teacher or firefighter or whatever it may be? And part of it is that I believe the role of government is to create what I call the infrastructure of opportunity in our society. And by that, I mean that just as there's an infrastructure of roads and streets and highways that helps all of us get to where we want to go on the road, if you think about it, in the United States, what we work to do is create an infrastructure of opportunity that helps all of us get to where we want to go in life. So when we fight for great schools and universities and a strong healthcare system where everybody has healthcare coverage and an economy that provides well-paying jobs with a strong minimum wage, what we're really fighting for, what we're talking about, what we're debating is what that infrastructure of opportunity is going to look like in American society. And I've been very honored and proud and excited at being somebody who has tried to help build that over the years for the people of San Antonio.
Representative Castro, about your career and your journey towards becoming a politician, what are some of the roadblocks that you came across, the most important ones that you think were the ones that challenged you the most?
Well, early on, I think that, the roadblocks have probably evolved a little bit over the years, although I guess some stay constant. But I started running for office when I was 26. And my brother started running for office, I guess, when he was 25 or so. And so anytime you run as a young candidate for almost for any office you run for, whether it's school board or city council or Congress, whatever it is, people will look at you kind of skeptically because they wonder whether somebody who's that young really has something to contribute. And so I've always told people that are young candidates or that want to run for office young, that your voice counts as much as anyone else's, and that your perspective and your opinion and your take on things matters and has a place just like anyone else's. So I would say early on, it was probably youth, and kind of being pinged by some for that youth. And then also early on, because I took on an incumbent, another Democratic incumbent in the Democratic primary, part of it was money also. When you're taking on an incumbent, usually, especially in your own party, you're locked out of a lot of financial resources to build your campaign coffers and pay for all the materials that you need or the advertising that you need. And so I ran my first race really on a shoestring. I think I spent about $24,000, $25,000 in that first race, and about 4,000 of that was my own money that I had saved up. So the resources and the money and the financing for the campaign early on was a challenge. And then the third one that I'll mention is just has nothing to do with age or with money, but that was being a Democrat in a heavily Republican state in Texas. I was mostly in the deep minority party in the state legislature and the state house for 10 years. And so that was always a challenge because you come in with very big dreams about the kind of legislation you want to work on and pass and the big changes and reforms that you want to make. And when you're in the minority party, it's very, very difficult to see those big dreams at least through. And then I served 6 more years in the minority party in Congress until finally in 2018, Democrats won back the House of Representatives. And so this is the first term actually where I'm in a Democratic House, there's a Democratic Senate, and we have a Democratic president now.
Thank you, Representative. Many of us in the OLLU community, you serve as our inspiration. I will pass it now to Rogelio. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Representative Castro, as you know, Texas faced a devastating winter storm in the month of February for which it was unprepared. What is your take on this issue? And in your opinion, how essential do you think that the preparedness is when it comes to future climate events? Furthermore, what is your impression of Senator Ted Cruz's trip to Cancun during this winter storm?
Well, obviously the winter storm was devastating for all of us as Texans to varying degrees. It turns out that there were over 200 people that died in Texas because of that snowstorm. And, the subject of our conversation tonight, or part of our conversation, which is the impeachment trial in the Senate, and then the snowstorm dovetail for me a little bit because we wrapped up the trial on February 13th. And then I got home to my family in San Antonio on the afternoon of February 14th. And by about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, my power was going off. And my power ended up going off for about 55 hours. My brother's water, I think, got cut off for a while. My mom's garage flooded over there off Culebra Road on the Deep West Side. So she, like a lot of other people, her pipes burst. And so we have to make sure, well, number one, climate change is real. And we need state leaders and federal leaders who acknowledge that it's real and plan for it. Secondly, the state of Texas had been warned on a few occasions by the federal government that something like this could eventually happen and had refused to force power companies to take the necessary precautions to prevent this from happening. And so Texas got caught flat-footed. And so what I wish for the state is that we do everything necessary to make sure that we're prepared next time we get heavy winter weather like that. And that's absolutely doable through legislation, through executive action, but it's got to take a commitment to understanding and believing that we're going to be facing severe winter events more often in the state of Texas and really throughout the country and the world.
Thank you, Representative, for your answer. I will now pass it on to Madison to ask the next question.
Alrighty, so I'm gonna look out to see if we have Representative Raskin here. My question is focused on him. Okay.
Unfortunately, not yet.
Okay, so we're gonna move, instead of that, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next question, which will be with Rosa. And when Raskin comes back, I'll go ahead and step in and we'll ask him that question. Thank you very much. Rosa?
Thank you, Madison. So, Representative Castro, what was the most challenging part of managing the impeachment trial?
There were many challenging parts. I was one of 9 impeachment managers. Of course, Jamie was the lead impeachment manager, but there was a mountain of evidence to gather, and we basically had a little less than a month to get ready for the trial. Um, we had to divide up the responsibilities on who was going to take which parts of the presentation. We had to agree on a strategy and a message that we were trying to get across. We also faced an uphill battle because the Senate, you needed 67 votes to convict Donald Trump in the United States Senate, and there are only 50 Democrats. We knew that it was a long shot to try to get 60 to 67, but all of us tried to remain optimistic that we could possibly get there. Because, if you start out believing that you're never going to get there, you're never going to win, you have no chance, then you've already beaten yourself in your own mind. And so even though we understood that the odds were long, we believed that there was a possibility. And as it turns out, we got 57 votes, 10 short of what we needed. But it was the most bipartisan impeachment vote that the country has ever seen. No, we haven't had many impeachment votes. Fortunately, this hasn't happened too many times in our country, but it was the most bipartisan one. And so those were some of the challenges, and is trying to connect with the senators on a human level and trying to get them to put aside their own partisanship, really, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, and appreciate what the president had incited, which was a riot, an insurrection, and and get across this idea that there has to be consequences for a president of any party that does that, but also that you have to set a precedent so that no president, as Jamie said back then, feels like he or she has a January exception, um, you know, to their term in office. In other words, they feel like, well, if I incite an insurrection or I do some other impeachable act a few weeks before I'm going to leave office, then Congress can't do anything to me because I'm about to leave office. That would encourage all kinds of bad behavior and malfeasance from future presidents. And quite honestly, at the end of the trial, given the result, that's a risk that we run going forward with future presidents.
Representative Castro. Thank you. I apologize. You mentioned bipartisanship, and as you know, the impeachment vote and the Senate vote were pretty much bipartisan, with some Republicans breaking with their party in order to vote and impeach and convict Donald Trump. What do you think motivated them to go against their party, and how can we encourage bipartisanship when we need to solve the big problems that we face in this country?
Well, those are great questions. I think, obviously only the senators themselves can give their specific reasons for why they each individually voted to convict. But for the folks like Mitt Romney and others, I think part of it was certainly looking ahead into the future and asking themselves, what kind of precedent do we want to set? What kind of behavior do we expect from a president of the United States? And what's the danger if we let somebody like Donald Trump get away with doing what he did with no consequences at all? And I think ultimately they were able to put that principle and those values above fear of retribution by the Republican primary base that is obviously very enamored still with the former president. And so I think that was a big part of it. I also feel as though some of the Republicans may have known that, or may have in their hearts agreed that Donald Trump did something wrong, but simply didn't have the courage to vote their conscience, if you will. I think there's been a point where they have gotten fearful of the backlash of the primary Republican base if they came out against Donald Trump, including physical backlash. Y'all may have seen the incidents in the airport, for example, after the January 6th insurrection, where many of these members of Congress were being harangued and people were getting in their faces, including Mitt Romney in Utah. So I think there's actually for the first time in my tenure in politics, I felt as though people were starting to have physical fear of opposing, certain groups, in this case, the Republican base. And that's quite a scary place to be for our democracy. And then you had there was another part to that question. What was the first or second part?
The second part of the question was how important is bipartisanship in order to solve all of these big issues in our country that we're facing and that Americans get to see but never really resolved? What do you think? Why do you think bipartisanship is important?
Well, if you talk about the bipartisanship of elected officials in Congress, that is important as long as you have a filibuster that requires 60 votes in the Senate, then bipartisanship is essential to do anything that's big or really, really impactful on a large scale. So if you think about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, or comprehensive immigration reform, gun safety reform, any of those things that are controversial, you got to get to 60 votes. So you have to be able to court Republican politicians to come your way. Now, what's interesting is that there is a difference, and I think it's an important one, between bipartisanship among politicians and bipartisanship among the American people. Because if you look at these issues on comprehensive immigration reform, it's got more than 65 or 70% support among the American people. On things like background checks, you have close to 90% support among the American people. And on some of these big issues that I've supported and that many of us have been pushing for, the American people have already come together in a bipartisan way and agreed that we should make these changes. But the politics and the politicians in Washington and in the Senate, and particularly Republican politicians, are in disagreement with even their Republican constituents about how, whether they should support these issues. I think that bipartisanship obviously functionally is very important in Congress, but you already have pretty wide bipartisanship among the American people on these issues.
Thank you, Representative. Rogelio has a question that I think is very important. Go ahead, Rogelio.
Okay, thank you, Ava. Representative Castro, what are some of the ways that extreme party loyalty interferes with the efficiency of the legislative branch, and how does this affect public trust in our representatives?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that part of the big challenge is the institutional features of Congress and how districts are drawn. And some of these congressional districts are so gerrymandered to make it impossible for somebody of the other party to win you've just got a lot of folks who, and you see it with some of my Republican colleagues, that don't have to take into consideration, like I said, even when their constituents, may be okay with, say, background checks, they know that all they have to do is win the Republican primary, and then they've won their election. Now, I think that part of the solution is that politicians shouldn't be drawing political maps anymore, state legislative maps, congressional maps. I think all the states should have an independent redistricting commission in the way that California does, Iowa does, and some other states do. In Texas, it's a highly political process. My district, for example, the district that we're in, the 20th congressional district, looks like a butterfly. If you look at it on a map, it looks like a butterfly. There's another district that looks like a spaceship. So these odd shaped districts that just look crazy on a map, I think we got to get rid of that. And that, I think, will help ease some of the gridlock and the extreme partisanship that you see. But then, look, I mean, some of it, there's no way to get around it. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who supports this QAnon ideology, or Paul Gosar, who has recently retweeted white supremacist, tweets, and others. They were elected by a base of people in their districts, Americans. So it's a challenge of the representatives and the districts, but it's also a challenge of some of the beliefs among the American people who they represent.
I'm sorry to cut in. Thank you very much for that response. Representative Raskin is now with us, and so he's joined us, and there he is. So maybe we can welcome him. Hello.
Representative
see you,
Raskin,
Jamie.
thank you for
Hello,
joining us.
everybody. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can hear you. We can see you.
Oh man, that
Sorry
was
about the
very
issues.
frustrating. I've been looking forward to being with you guys all day, and the GOP deep state shut me down at the last minute. I was waiting there in the video wings for a half an hour. So hello, Professor Catherine Anderson. Hello, my dear Joaquin Castro, and everybody else. So forgive me, and would you repeat everything that I just missed in the last 20 minutes?
We will definitely rope you into the Q&A now that you're present. But Representative Castro has been holding down the House pretty well here.
He's always got my back. I appreciate it, Joaquin.
Representative Raskin, the last question that we asked Representative Castro was, what are some of the ways that extreme party loyalty interferes with the efficiency of the legislative branch, and how does this affect public trust in our representatives?
I mean, it's a deep question, and it's been with us from the founding of the country, because our Constitution was written against political parties in some sense. It doesn't mention political parties, much less a two-party system or the Democrats or Republicans. On the other hand, the First Amendment protects the freedom of speech and the freedom of assembly and the freedom of people to get together and to organize. And with single member district elections and presidential and gubernatorial, people are going to find their way into political parties. That's a sign of life. So let's not just condemn political parties. That's phony and that's artificial, and it doesn't get us to where we need to go. I mean, one easy way to get rid of political parties and partisanship is just to establish a one-party dictatorship, which some people in our country would love to do. Then if you get rid of political parties and you have one-party dictatorship, you don't have the problem of partisanship, okay? So partisanship, to a certain extent, is a sign of life. It's a sign of political freedom, that people are going to form parties and have different views and advance their views. But having said that, even though parties help us by organizing public opinion, articulating political programs, helping us to move programs through, like the $1.9 trillion Rescue Act package we just did, like HR 1 for voting rights to get rid of gerrymandering and to get rid of all these voter suppression tactics and so on. Political parties help in that sense, but I always tell people, remember, when you're running, you're in a competitive party system, that's a good thing. But when you're elected, you got to remember where the word party comes from. It comes from the French word parti. It means a part. And our party is just part of the whole. And we have to try to stand up for everybody, for the common good, for the general interest, for everybody. When Joaquin and I are in there and we're fighting for equal pay for equal work for women, we're not just fighting for equal pay for Democratic women, we're fighting for equal pay for Republican women and independent women. And we're not just fighting for environmental protection and to stop climate change so Democrats can survive. We're doing that for everybody. We know how to be nonpartisan because this is what we do with our constituent work. Someone calls my office and they ask for help on Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or PPP or VA benefits. We don't say, are you a Democrat or Republican? I'm only going to help the Democrats. That's not what we do. We know how to serve people in a nonpartisan way. And that's the mentality that we have to try to bring to our jobs. And especially when we're going through something like what we just went through, which was an organized violent attack on the republic itself, an incitement by a president of the United States of a violent insurrection to overthrow a popular election in order to install himself into office. That calls for the most nonpartisan constitutional patriotism in the country. We're standing up literally for the Constitution and for the government. And, I don't want to understate our achievement because it was a 57-43 vote in the Senate. We had commanding majorities in both the House and the Senate to define what the president did as a high crime and misdemeanor, an impeachable offense against the people. But as my friend Michael Anderson says, Trump beat the constitutional spread. right? He didn't make it. I mean, he kept us from making it to 2/3, but still, we've got the strongest bipartisan majority in history. There have been 4 impeachments of presidents, right? So we had Andrew Johnson, and we had Bill Clinton, and we had Trump 1 and Trump 2. This was by far the most bipartisan of any of the impeachments. We had 17 Republicans join us. Those people are constitutional patriots. They joined with us to define what the facts were. And then we saw, GOP senators who refused to look up at the video monitors. Joaquin and I saw them, Rand Paul sat there and he refused to look up at the screen when we were showing footage of the mob assaulting police officers, or of Donald Trump exhorting the mob to go and take back the government with strength. You're not going to take back your country with weakness. Go and fight like hell. You're not going to take America back by weakness. We saw this happen, and we saw senators who did their constitutional duty, who met their oath of office, and we saw senators who did not.
Thank you, Representative Raskin, for your answer to the question. I will now pass it on to Madison.
Hello, I'm Madison, Representative Raskin. It's nice to have you with us. I have a little 2-part question here. It's for both representatives. If Raskin could start. What lasting impact do you think the acquittal of President Trump will have on the future behavior of our presidents? And do you think the insurrection on our Capitol will invite future violence on our governmental institutions?
Well, those are some excellent questions, Madison. Thank you very much for both of them. The question of what impact it will have on future political leaders and on future violence is really up to us. In other words, this is living history. This is not over right now. If we had gotten a 2/3 conviction, I think he would have been established as a constitutional pariah in the country, someone exiled from the constitutional order. We could have moved by majority vote to disqualify him from ever holding office again. By the way, that's one way we know that this jurisdictional argument is completely phony, that the Senate can't conduct a trial of a president who's already left office. We know it's phony because the Constitution allows for disqualification. It's not as if removal from office is the last punishment. You also can be disqualified in the future as a way to protect the constitutional order against your crimes. But I think that he has been convicted in the court of public opinion. I think he's been convicted in the court of history. And I think he is a pariah in terms of the American political culture generally. He is not a pariah within the Republican Party, which now resembles much less a modern political party and much more a religious cult, where you have a cult of personality around one guy, and he tells everybody what to think about everything. And his control of the resources, of the money, of the power, of the masses within the cult means that everybody has to bow down to him like sycophants. And that's basically what they've become. I mean, it's a disgrace and a shame to Lincoln's party what's taken place there. What does it mean in terms of future violence? And again, I think that's up to us. And there's no doubt that it has emboldened the Proud Boys and the 3%ers and those kinds of groups. I see them on TV and I see them on the internet saying stuff like, well, it was not an armed insurrection because if we had wanted to take the government, we would have taken it. Speaking like that, kind of brandishing their participation in this attempted coup as some kind of badge of pride for them. Will there be effective prosecutions of these people for what they did? Will Donald Trump get his legal comeuppance, either through these Ku Klux Klan Act cases that have been brought or through other prosecutions taking place in DC by the US attorney or in New York? It's very important that this guy who has escaped the rule of law his entire life, this con man, this violator of women, this thief, whether he is going to be able to continue to escape and use the trappings of office for purposes of immunity or impunity, or are we going to be able to force a reckoning with the law. I think that that's very important in terms of what goes forward. But he undoubtedly is going to try to stay involved in our politics. He may try to run for president again, although we think Section 3 of the 14th Amendment prevents it, because it says that if you've participated in insurrection or rebellion against the republic, you can't you can't hold federal office again. And that was a narrowing down of what the radical Republicans wanted after the Civil War. They were saying if anybody participated in the Confederacy, in rebellion, then they shouldn't be able to vote again. It was disenfranchisement. When it got over to the Senate, they narrowed it down. They said it's not going to apply to anybody who participated in the secession or rebellion. It's only going to be people who swore an oath to the Constitution before, as a federal official, violated that oath, and then proceeded to participate in rebellion. And those people will be prevented not from voting, but just from holding office again. So they narrowed it down to that kind of bullseye core. And guess who's in the middle of that bullseye? Donald Trump is, because he swore an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. He violated the oath. And then, basically, he's got to be prevented from ever holding office again.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Representative Castro, what do you feel, what lasting impact do you think that the acquittal will have on future behavior of presidents? Do you think this whole process is going to incite future violence with our governmental institutions?
Well, I agree with Jamie that ultimately that answer is up to us. It's up to this generation of Americans and future generations of Americans, what we take from this moment that we've just lived through and this presidency that we endured for 4 years. My hope is that because Donald Trump was impeached twice, because we got the most bipartisan vote in that Senate trial that we've ever seen on impeachment, that his legacy will be so tarnished that Americans will never elect him to any office again. I happen to think, as Jamie mentioned, it is quite possible that he tries to run for president again. And I hope that, to be quite honest, that we have done damage to his legacy and to his viability as a candidate, because I believe he's unfit to hold public office in the United States again, and certainly not fit to hold the presidency. And the Republican Party today is very much built around Donald Trump. And I think that's a big part of the reason that they lost the presidential election and that the Senate was retaken by Democrats, because Americans want, they respect the political parties, but they want a political party that isn't beholden to one character as much of the Republican Party is today. And in terms of the prospect for violence again, I think we have to be vigilant to make sure that that the Capitol is protected, of course, and we're in the process of doing that now. And do everything that we can to discourage the kind of I guess part of it was race baiting that we saw with Donald Trump, and the constant agitation that we saw him agitating people to violence, in fact. And so, we need to quell those things. And I hope that we don't see an incident again, certainly not any time in the near future that we saw on January 6th.
Madison, can I add one thing to what Joaquin just said?
Go ahead.
The Department of Homeland Security has said that domestic violent extremism, white nationalism, is the single biggest terror threat in America today. What we saw on January 6th was a form of terrorism. We've seen terrorism at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Cleveland. We saw it at the Emmanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. We saw it in El Paso. We've seen it all over the country. In fact, some of the experts have said that what made January 6th so extremely dangerous was that under the auspices of Donald Trump and Make America Great Again, they brought together all of these different extremist groups that had not worked together before, and they worked together for the first time. So I'm glad that the Department of Justice under Attorney General Merrick Garland has made stopping domestic terrorism by white supremacist groups a major priority for this whole administration.
Thank you for that. Thank you for both of your responses. I actually have one more question for Representative Raskin. We know that you're an advocate for mental health awareness. What advice can you give our students about coping with stress when coming across challenges with their educational journey, or even if they choose to pursue politics? What advice could you give?
Well, it's a great question. I think that if politics is a stress-inducing thing for you, then you should take some time away from politics. But I believe that politics is actually a great way for people to channel a lot of the distress and anxiety and isolation that we've been living through, not just with the last president, but with COVID-19. It's been tremendously difficult for young people to be so isolated, to not be able to get on with their educational careers, to not be able to get on with their professional careers, to not be able to pursue their relationships. I mean, just because of the sheer physical difficulty of talking to people safely, it's been really tough, and people have to understand that the isolation they feel, the stress and anxiety they feel are part of this political and social moment that we're in. And I don't want people to feel isolated, lonely, and depressed. So people need to connect with others politically and socially and culturally. And, I've got a project that I'm trying to get all of my colleagues involved in this summer called Democracy Summer. It's for high school and college students to come, and we do a training on the history of social change in America and the civilizing movements of our times, the civil rights movement, and the women's movement, and the labor movement, and the human rights movement, the environmental movement, the LGBTQ movement, all of it. We do trainings about that. And then we also train them in the arts of democratic politics and door knocking and canvassing and fundraising and social media and so on. And I'm hoping that this is what I've basically turned my political campaign into, and I hope that that my beloved colleagues like Joaquin Castro will give Democracy Summer a try to put education sort of at the center of it and to help this generation, because you guys have a lot to teach America. You've really gotten beyond a lot of the racism and the sexism and the homophobia and the immigrant bashing and all that stuff. You've also, unfortunately, gotten a little bit beyond grammar too, but that's a different problem. I take that up with my kids all the time. Guess that's a product of Twitter and texting and everything. But anyway, we need your generation. We need you, and we don't want you to be isolated and depressed about what's happened. As depressing and as isolating as it's been, we need you out there as a force field for positive change in the country.
Thank you so much, Representative Raskin. We really appreciate your answer. I'm going to go ahead and move it up onto Rosa, where she can ask her question. Thank you so very much for both of your answers.
Thank you, Madison. And this question goes to Representative Raskin. We are frequently told to contact our representatives, but how much do calls and letters from people in your districts play a part in your decision making?
Well, let me speak personally. I'd love to hear what Joaquin says about this too. But I pay very close attention to it, not so much for defining my basic values. I mean, my values are going to be my values. But I want to know what's on people's minds and what's in their hearts and what they're most focused on. I mean, we have heard, I'm sure Congressman Castro has heard the way I have from literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people about the trial. I've gotten a great window into what America's thinking about what Donald Trump did to America. And maybe it doesn't have polling style scientific validity to it, but I can read messages from tens of thousands of Americans from every state in the union and all over the world. And that helps me a lot, you know. I mean, I don't think you're fundamentally going to change, you know, who Jim Jordan is or who Matt Gaetz is or who Joaquin Castro is or who Jamie Raskin is. But at least on the progressive side of the equation, I would say we pay very close attention to what people are going through. I mean, one of the things I heard about during COVID-19 was how difficult it was for people who have kids to try to be on Zoom and also take care of their children. And daycare and childcare has surged to the forefront of my concerns because of the people I've heard from. And I know, you know, unemployment benefits also has been something that has come to the fore because of what we've heard from people. So I think you're not going to basically change somebody's values or their politics, but you can definitely, if there's somebody that you agree with and you can connect with, you can definitely change what they're paying attention to, what they're working on.
Thank you. And Representative Castro, would you like to mention anything else?
Well, I think that's right. I think Jamie is right. And a few things. I do think that every once in a while, you'll come across legislation where it's legitimately tough for you to make a decision which way you're going to vote or where you're going to go. And especially in moments like that, I always look to read the emails that I get. I would say when I started in 2003 in the state legislature, there were a lot more letters that you would also get. You still get some letters now. I got a lot after the Senate trial, but a lot of emails and phone call messages to kind of see, you know, you're trying to figure out or get other people's perspective in your neighborhood and in your district and how they see an issue. But I also think that one of the fascinating things for me over the years is that some of the best ideas that I've had for legislation have come from constituents. In other words, they were not original ideas from my own mind or really even the mind of my staff members, the minds of my staff members. They were from constituents who are working in certain fields day to day, and they say, hey, you know, this is a problem or this is a challenge or you all should do this thing differently, because they're the ones that are actually living through the experience. So what I'm saying to y'all is for you know, those of you that are going through college or graduate school or you're in a career, you know, as you think about what you would change about the fields that you're working in, those thoughts can be very valuable for city council members, state legislators, members of Congress, and so forth. And you know, and so you should always feel like you have a role to play, and you know, that you can speak up and that it can have an impact, because it truly has for me over the years when it comes to these ideas.
Thank you both. I will now pass it to Eva.
This question is for both representatives, but firstly, Representative Castro, how can we improve the conditions of asylum seekers to provide a more humane treatment? And in the same vein, how can we create a better process for immigrants in order to create a path towards citizenship for people who have DACA and those who are undocumented?
Well, I hope that all of you will help us push very hard. I know Jamie's been working on this a lot for comprehensive immigration reform, for us to be able to get it through the House of Representatives and then get it through United States Senate. We finally have an opportunity now with a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, even though it's a slim majority, and a Democratic House to do it. And we have to seize this moment to accomplish it. Or my fear is that we could be sitting here 10 years from now talking and we still don't get immigration reform. We haven't gotten it done. That's my greatest fear about leaving this term without something on immigration reform. Because you all know, many people have been living their lives, including a lot of San Antonians, DACA recipients, and their parents, the folks that would have qualified for DAPA under President Obama's executive action, have been living in limbo. And these are folks that are just as American as any of us, many of them. And so, you know, so we got to make a strong push this term to get it done. But on asylum seekers, we've all seen the pictures at the border throughout the years of people being held in very cramped, unsanitary conditions, sleeping with what looks like aluminum blankets, right? In fact, I went to a facility in 2019 with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Madeline Dean and Ayanna Pressley and others, and we filmed 15 or 20 Cuban women who were sharing what is basically a jail cell in a CBP processing center with a barely functioning toilet and sink for all of them. And that's still the first place that asylum seekers are taken by Border Patrol when they present themselves for asylum at the border. And I believe that we have to completely reimagine what we do with people as a first stop. You know, that's the first thing, is that we need completely new facilities for how you temporarily hold asylum seekers. I think the Biden administration has an opportunity to not just reimagine it, but actually do it. And I hope that they'll pursue it. And then also ultimately with asylum seekers, we've got to get them to their family, relatives, and sponsors as soon as possible, rather than keeping them in the CBP processing centers or the influx shelters or the emergency shelters, whatever it is. Most of them have family, relatives, and family members that will house them, that will take care of them, and help them get to court when they have their day in court to be considered for asylum. And then the final thing, y'all, is all of this is going on in the background after a president of the United States has stoked the worst kind of xenophobia that we've seen for in so many years. It's affected the Latino community, as y'all know. Jamie mentioned El Paso. You see, it's also affected the AAPI community, the Asian American community, and what they're dealing with now, and a spike of hate crimes over the past year during COVID, as the president, called COVID all of these, names that were marked by racism. And so, so it's been a tough background that we've been working in, but we've got to plow through it.
Thank you, Representative. I think that the Biden administration does have a lot to work on, since the Trump administration left a lot of undone and a lot of chaos. Representative Raskin, do you have something to add about our lack of comprehensive immigration reform and for undocumented people and people that receive DACA, and also our asylum seekers that are at the border?
I've got a lot of DACA recipients in my district, and I've got a lot of TPS people from Salvador, from Honduras, from Venezuela in my district. There have been periods where the U.S. Congress, on a bipartisan basis, has come very close to really doing comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, it is not out of reach in any way if we can get everybody to agree to stop using immigrants as scapegoats and a whipping post, and using immigration as an issue to divide us and polarize us. The truth is that America thrives on people. That's what makes us great, is these waves of immigrants that have come in. I mean, everybody on this Zoom presumably is either an immigrant or a child of immigrants, unless you are a descendant of slaves who've been brought over involuntarily, or you're descendants of the original Native Americans. But otherwise, the vast majority of the country, we're all the products of immigration. And that is what has made America such a special country. And Tom Paine said that America would be an asylum for humanity, not an insane asylum, mind you, but an asylum for humanity, for people fleeing from political repression and poverty and religious tyranny all over the world. And so we've got to recover that. And obviously there are always going to be problems at this border, because it's pretty much globally unique, in that we have, through Mexico and Central America, we have poor countries that are right next to a very rich country, the richest country on earth. So that's something that we got to figure out, but we got to figure it out in a way that's consistent with our values. And we can do that if we stop demonizing and vilifying people.
Thank you, Representative Raskin. I think that it is important to not address this issue as a crisis of people just coming here, but the real crisis is all of this that undocumented and asylum seekers have to go through in order to get to a better place. Thank you for your answer. We will pass it down to Rogelio.
Thank you, Ava. This question will be for both representatives. Representative Raskin, if you can please answer first. The question is, what can be done to stop the suppression of voting rights?
Well, I mean, that is the critical question. So thank you for raising it. There are 350 bills plus in America right now to cut back on early voting, weekend voting, in Georgia to make it a crime to give somebody a bottle of water while they're waiting in line to vote, while they're making it more difficult to vote and prolonging the process of voting and making the lines longer. None of this should be surprising in any way because although voting is in some sense the heart of the American creed, at the same time, there has been a constant push to disenfranchise people and to keep people from voting. And that's a political tactic, right? So, sometimes it's cut across the political parties, and sometimes you get one party that's identified with expanding the vote and another party that's identified with restricting the vote and disenfranchisement. That's where we are today. And I'm proud that we passed H.R. 1 to dismantle gerrymandering and to mandate independent redistricting commissions in the country, that we're fighting for automatic voter registration as a counter to all of the voter suppression that's going on. There's a push for statehood, which I support, for Washington, D.C. We're the only nation on earth which disenfranchises the people of its capital city. That's 700,000 tax-paying, draftable American citizens who are not represented in the Congress that ultimately governs everything, including their local budget, their local police force, whether or not gay people can adopt, whatever, all of that. And also statehood for Puerto Rico. I'm totally for that too. We're talking about more than 3 million American citizens who don't have political equality. And the people of both Puerto Rico and DC have seen the price of that kind of colonialism disenfranchisement. Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria, when they were waiting for hundreds of millions of dollars in aid, and instead got, some paper towels chucked at them, and in DC, they were cheated out of hundreds of millions of dollars in COVID-19 aid because they weren't a state. So, to me, that's important. Tocqueville said that democracy is either expanding and growing or it's shrinking and it's contracting and going away. So I think that as Congressman Castro mentioned, we're going to come face to face with the filibuster in dealing with H.R. 1 and maybe with immigration, and also with a universal background check on violent criminals purchasing firearms, that background check is supported by 95% of the American people, but still there's a move to filibuster and blockade it. So I think we're going to have to wrestle with the filibuster, which is not in the Constitution. It's really deeply at odds with constitutional values and majority rule because it creates a supermajority requirement, essentially. And a supermajority requirement in the Senate means that a small minority of senators representing a small minority of Americans can blockade the majority of Americans from guaranteeing the right to vote. So I think that we're going to have to confront that. And so start educating people about the filibuster and the threat that it is to democratic values.
Thank you, Congressman. Representative Castro, do you have anything to add?
What was the original question again?
The question was, what can be done to stop the suppression of voting rights?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, Jamie spoke very well to it. H.R. 1 is our major reform bill, and we're working as hard as we can to be able to get that through the full Congress and onto the president's desk. But we need to approach this at every angle, not just on the federal level, but also at the state level as well. I served 10 years in the state legislature, and I saw the state of Texas do not only voter ID, but also other behind the scenes measures that were meant to make it harder to get more people engaged in voting. For example, it used to be that if you were if you were deputized to register Texans to vote, it didn't matter what city or county you were deputized in, you could go register voters anywhere throughout Texas. Well, the Texas legislature, I think in 2011, changed it so that if you want to register people in Bexar County in San Antonio, you have to be deputized in Bexar County. If you want to do it up the road in Austin, you have to go to Austin and get deputized. And so there is a slew of state laws that I believe also need to change in order to make things accessible for everybody, to make voting more accessible for everybody, including defeating SB 7 and HB 6 in the Texas legislature right now. Y'all can have a great impact right now by reaching out to your state legislators and state senators to let them know that you oppose these restrictions on voting that are on the brink of passing at this point. Fortunately, some of the companies in Texas have now spoken up, just like they have in Georgia. But in Georgia, it was too late because the Georgia legislature had passed and that Governor Kemp had signed these restrictive voting measures that really were trying to solve problems that don't exist, right? They're just what these things are, these voter suppression efforts are, they're an attempt at point shaving. They're trying to throw up little roadblocks that will shave off a certain percentage of people who ultimately go to vote successfully. And in doing that, the Republican Party believes that it can shape who's able to vote, and ultimately can hang on to power in places like Texas and Georgia. So, our HR 1 is our major reform legislation, but we also have a lot of defensive work to do in trying to block these other things in the Texas legislature and other places as well.
Thank you, Representative Castro, for your answer. We really appreciate it. We will now move on to the next question with Madison.
Yes, thank you, Rogelio. This is a two-part question, or this is for both representatives, I should say. But we will start with Castro. Representative Castro, how can students and community members become more involved in our political systems? Now, I know that you said reach out to state legislators, but what's a simplified way that we can really, as students and as like community, how can we really put ourselves out there? How can we become more involved in our political systems more than what we're doing now? Is there any way, or what's your input?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I'm excited, always excited to see young people engage and get involved and care about our political process. Because it's always a challenge. Look, in Texas, we have historically ranked, in the bottom 3 or 5 in terms of states in voter participation. And you're talking about something that goes beyond that, which is not just going to vote, but actually participating in the process. So in whatever way you envision being part of it, if you want to run for office in the next few years, I would encourage you to seriously look at it. Whatever it is, school board, city council, state legislature, whatever you're thinking of running for, and believe that there is a place for your voice in that process. But if you're thinking, well, I want to get involved somehow, but I don't know exactly how, I would say start with this. Start with something that interests you. Start with a topic or a subject or an issue or a candidate that you see that really catches your attention and draws your passion. Something that interests you. Let that usher you into your involvement and your engagement. And campaigns, for example, are always excited and in need of volunteers or staff to help them win their races. And causes, right, whether it's for climate change or immigration reform or gun safety reform, causes are also always in need of supporters and volunteers. So you should always believe that whatever you're passionate about, whether it's a candidate or a person or a cause, that there's a place for you to jump in and get involved.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We would like to move on to Representative Raskin. How do you think students and community members can become more involved in our political systems?
Well, I've got a very simple 2-word answer, which is democracy summer. I set up this whole project for young people, and now in this partnership with the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, it's all over the country. So I think somebody put the web link up in the chat. Check out Democracy Summer. It's for college kids. It's for high school kids. The younger students will learn from you. And what we do is we have the greatest speakers in the country, like Joaquin Castro and Bob Moses, who was in the civil rights movement. John Lewis used to come, our late beloved colleague, but Nancy Pelosi has come to participate in it. We're going to have some great people, and the theme of it this summer is the fight to vote, nonviolent movements, violent backlash, and the continuing struggle for strong democracy in America. Because what we're engaged in this Congress, this summer, in this discussion on Zoom, it's continuous with all of the struggles that have come before in America. Lincoln talked about government of the people, by the people, and for the people. America didn't start off that way. We were a slave republic of Christian white male property owners over the age of 21, but it has been through social struggle and political education and constitutional change that we've opened America up. And that process continues today, but it is a struggle and it's a fight. And if the Trump period taught us anything, it's if you believe in democracy, then you got to fight for democracy, and not fight the way they do, not by beating up police officers and breaking windows. You got to fight by organizing people and educating people.
Thank you, Representative Raskin. If you would like to say any other words, I know that you have to leave around this time. If you would like to go ahead and say anything else for a closing statement, or would you like to express anything else? I really liked your idea of the Democracy Summer, and I think students will really appreciate that, and they will utilize the link in the description box. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that, Madison. I've got 5 minutes more, so I feel bad about all our technical difficulties at the beginning, so I'll just be late for my next thing. So I'm happy to take another question with Congressman Castro, if you got one.
Perfect. Actually, that concludes our prepared questions for you, but we're going to kind of flip the script now. And do y'all have maybe even questions for us as OLLU students, or as just people, students in general, or as in just young people? Do y'all have any questions for us that maybe we can answer or help you with?
Well, I'm interested in what you think are the political issues, the public issues, or the private issues that will motivate most young people now to get engaged in politics and turn them into political actors.
Personally, to get younger people involved, especially at a younger audience, I see a lot of people influenced, and this kind of might sound a little silly at first, but like TikTok. You think of these young kids are on these apps, or they're on their phones, and they're doing things. I have a 10-year-old niece, and she's already on all the social media. She has her own phone and everything. It's like, oh my goodness. And she's like, oh no, this person's right, or this person's, or this. It's like, wow, you already have an opinion that fast, okay? So I think a lot of things that can like kind of give it a little bit more of a reach out, or a little bit more of like social media, a little bit more of those younger little TikToks, or those little younger apps that people are really like. It reaches not only people from the age of maybe 55, but for my father, or maybe from the ages of 10, like my niece, where she's really seeing these maybe YouTubers or something. She's seeing these things, oh, these poor people, and she's having all of these ideas and thoughts about what's going on, and she's forming her own opinions. And I'm just so amazed by what these little things can do. Certain foods pop up and they're sold out because of the influence that they have. So I think that reaching out to the younger generations, especially now, not just me, I'm already older now, I'm a 21-year-old, I feel old, but a little bit younger, they're already okay, I already have an opinion on this. I already have an opinion on Trump. I have an opinion on this. Oh, I'm a liberal, or I'm a conservative. They're already forming these things at such a young age. I think it's imperative that we reach out towards that younger generation. That's just me, but all right. So if y'all have any more questions, we have a complete panel of students. So feel free to reach out, or if any of one of our students have anything to say, go ahead and unmute. Go on ahead. Thank you.
Madison, I would just like to agree with everything that you just said towards getting people to join on. And I think the Democracy Summer Pack is a great thing as well, because prior to this meeting, I've never heard of that program, and I think that's a very good program that will benefit a lot of the younger generation in the future.
Awesome. Well, please check it out. Madison, I think you're right to raise the whole question of social media and how we learn and how we communicate. Our colleague, the AOC, who I think Joaquin mentioned before, she really, I mean, you know, she's much closer to your age than she is to my age. And I adore Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's very in touch with how young people communicate and interact. And we've got a lot to learn from her. And I think it's very important for us to figure out what are those mechanisms of communication that young people are using now.
Yes, I'd like to jump in with some questions from students, you know, some issues, right, that they are concerned about. And on the chat, Angie Dominguez says, student loan forgiveness is something that's really important to young people today, and also having low cost or free education at community colleges. And so that's something that, you know, we're wondering how, you know, you all can support. Also raising the minimum wage, right?
Yeah. Jamie, do you want to take it since you got to go real quick? And then
sure,
I'll...
yeah, let me my parting comment to you, Joaquin. I mean, those are two issues that are very close to our hearts and to what our caucus is trying to do. We've been fighting for the $15 minimum wage. That's just to lift people up out of poverty. I mean, somebody who's working, you know, 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week should not be in poverty. They should be able to support their family. They certainly should be able to support themselves. And so, you know, the minimum wage today, if it had kept pace with inflation since the 1930s, would be around $27 or $28, a lot more than just 15. But at the very least, we should be able to do that. And you see what a political struggle it is. But we agree totally with loan forgiveness and college affordability as being central issues. And I'm somebody who really believes in trying to make community college freely accessible to all. I mean, people should be able to go to college, and you know, you will hear stories from our parents, our grandparents about how you could go to college for $100 a semester, and you know, still young people have got to work in order to have basic spending money for themselves and so on. But tuition should not be like you take out loans and then you graduate from college and you have a mortgage for the rest of your life. It's just you don't have the house, you know. So we've got to look in reality at the affordability of college. So we are all for that. Obviously, we've been in a struggle with the Republicans about that. They don't believe in that. We believe that education, like the environment, like healthcare, are public goods, and we've got to make them work for the public. So thank you so much for making me part of this conversation, Professor Anderson, Madison, all these wonderful students you got there. And I hope when we get through the nightmare of COVID-19, I'll be able to come and visit sometime. All best.
Good to see you, Jamie.
Thank you, Congressman Castro. He's got my proxy now.
Was there anything that you would like to add about that question of affordable education and loan forgiveness?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to this. There's the piece, the question about how do you make college more affordable? But that's a question for people who are either presently in college or getting ready to go to college. And so on that end, I think we ought to strive for free community college and also for debt-free college for students. That's, I think, what we should strive for. The other end of that is all of the people that have already graduated from college, many of whom are carrying massive debt that's affecting their ability to get their own apartment or buy a car or live out on their own or pursue their dream job because they've got to do something else to pay these massive loans back. And I am hopeful, and I am pushing the administration to offer significant debt cancellation to students. I believe that the United States can do that, that it will actually be an economic stimulus for the country. But in addition to the government canceling some student debt, I also believe that private universities should step up and dedicate more of those that have, especially those that have sizable endowments, should dedicate some of those endowments, the principal even of some of those endowments, to student debt cancellation, and cancel some of the student loan debt for their students. And I think that's also a place where students can speak up and alumni can speak up and ask their colleges and universities to also be part of contributing to that debt cancellation. Because I do think that it's an important issue. I think that at this point, we've gotten to the point where student debt literally can hamstring people's careers for years, sometimes into people's 30s, right? And that this country should take that issue on front and center. And of course, agree on the minimum wage, that we should raise it to $15 an hour. And I have gone really head to head with groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which represents a lot of big businesses in the country, because they have been against raising the minimum wage by even a penny. It hasn't been raised since 2009. And this huge business industry lobby group has fought raising the minimum wage even by 1 penny since then. And I strongly disagree with their position and think that again, that this would be a big stimulus and that it's the right thing to do for people, so.
Thank you for that and for those ideas. I got my PhD in 2014, and I'm definitely one of those people hamstrung by student debt, and I'm well beyond 30. So we also have a question here about education from Dr. Valerie Martinez, and she's interested in the bill. It's HB 1504. It's an ethnic studies bill, and it's currently in the Texas legislature right now. And she's wondering, what actions can you take to advocate for this bill that would allow high school students to take Mexican American, African American, Native American, Asian American studies as fundamental parts of their, their education?
That's a great question, and I'm glad that y'all asked about that. So I'm in the process now of reaching out to state legislators and letting them know that I wholeheartedly support it. And it was a few years ago where a group led by Tony Diaz from Houston, Angela Valenzuela, Dr. Angela Valenzuela, and others, including some folks in San Antonio, a group called Libro Traficante, led the movement to allow for ethnic studies, Mexican American studies, in our schools, our public schools. And they got the State Board of Education to okay that. And this would take that a step further now. But let me tell y'all why this is important, why I think it's important, and why it's fundamental to our education. And I want to take the example of Mexican Americans here. Mexican Americans have been written out, and Latinos generally, I think, as well as other groups, have been written out of the telling of American history. And they're not part of the canon, and oftentimes not part of the curriculum in American history courses in our schools, in secondary education. And they're also often not part of the state histories. So in Texas, for example, there is a little bit of Texas history that talks about some Mexican American figures, but I would argue not commensurate with a population that is 40% of the state, and not commensurate with the incredible contributions that the Hispanic community, the Mexican American community, has made to the development, the prosperity, and the success of the state of Texas. So what happens is a lot of our folks, a lot of our young kids don't ever learn about the contributions that anybody from their community has made to the development and the success of the nation. And I believe that does something. It undermines your sense of place and belonging and your anchor to a nation when you are written out of its history. But it also does something beyond its effect on the people, on the community itself. It also affects the way other people beyond your community see you. And so I want to tell you, as when I was chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I just finished my chairmanship in January. We are doing a lot of work, and I'm still doing a lot of work on diversity and inclusion of Latinos in American media across different platforms. So entertainment, so television, film, streaming, publishing, hard news, etc. So here's just a quick vignette on the depths of invisibility for Latinos in the United States and for Mexican Americans in the United States. So we were having a Zoom call with the Association of American Publishers about our pressing them to include more Latinos and Latinas as authors that they publish and also as employees at publishing houses. And part of this call was a CEO of one of the top 5 publishing companies in the country, who was also one of the board members for the Association of American Publishers. And I asked this gentleman at one point in the conversation whether he could name 3 Latinos or Latinas who had had a significant impact on American history. And this gentleman, who was a very accomplished man, he was probably in his late 50s, had gone, I think, to Columbia University and Stanford University. He thought about it, and after a few seconds, he said, no, I can't. And this, again, is somebody who's the CEO of a major textbook publishing company in the United States and one of the largest in the world. Couldn't think of 3 Latinos or Latinas who were basically historical figures in our country. But the unfortunate thing is, I think if you ask that question of 90% of Americans, including many of our own Latinos, they couldn't give you an answer either. And my point is that there is a cost to that invisibility and that void in narrative. What you're talking about there is not only an invisibility, but it's a void in narrative. In other words, the larger American community doesn't know who you are as a Latino. Like, they don't know where your community fits into the country. They don't know who from your community has made any significant or meaningful contribution to the country. They don't identify you with any particular period in American history. And so what happens then is that in that black hole, that void of narrative, it gets filled with all of the historical stereotypes in American media, in television, in film. And on top of that, it gets layered by the disinformation on things like social media and Facebook and other platforms, and also by the ugly rhetoric of politicians who will say that you're rapists and criminals and all that. And so this becomes, it all starts at the foundation, I think. It starts with the fact that your story is never told in history textbooks or in classes in public schools. And so, yes, I wholeheartedly support Christina's bill, and will do everything that I can to make it successful.
Thank you so much for that response. I couldn't have said it better myself as a professor of Mexican American Studies. And of course, I encourage everybody, all the students, and to take CMAS 1301 with me in order to, start the process of learning, right, about our history, and also feeling pride in that history and in that culture. So I have another question here, probably the last one, since we only have 2 minutes left. And this one is about climate change. And so Dr. Barnett asks if you see any hope for significant legislation or policy developments around climate change.
Yeah, I do. I mean, the first thing is through executive action, President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. So that was one very positive step. I also believe, as I think it was mentioned, I think because I saw that they posted the question on the chat, that as part of the infrastructure bill, there will be an effort to combat climate change. Let me give you a very specific example of that. Pete Buttigieg, who is now the Secretary of Transportation, one of the things that he wants to do is add hundreds of thousands of electric charging stations for electric vehicles across the country. So that's one way to ease our reliance on gasoline, on fossil fuels in automobiles. Also, through our committee work, we're trying to make it so that, for example, issues of climate change are not just considered domestic issues, but also issues of foreign affairs. So, for example, we're pushing to recognize climate refugees as a category of refugees So it's not just people that are fleeing violent dictators or other dangerous oppressive circumstances. We also acknowledge that if you look at Central America and the hurricanes that they've been battling the last few years, the natural disasters, that you have some people that are motivated by these horrendous climate events. And just to give you a sliver of an example of what I mean, even domestically, the last hurricane that hit the Gulf Coast, I remember, a few months back, I remember that night I drove past, I was on I-10 and I drove past, I can't remember exactly where it was. I was in San Antonio, but there were just like a line of cars that had driven in from the Gulf Coast and from the Houston area that were just waiting. They were parked. Most of them had their lights on. Like they weren't going to spend the money for a hotel. They had just come to San Antonio waiting for this storm to pass, right? But that's a micro example of people who are affected by climate. And if any of you are from Houston, you know that Houston at this point is hit by a major flood about once every 2 or 3 years, right? But they were leaving Houston or the Gulf Coast, even if just for a night or two, because of a climate event. Well, that's happening all over the world. So I'm confident that as many executive actions as possible will be taken by administration, that we will push this issue in different formats now. But we still got to deal with the filibuster, so we come back to that discussion and what we're going to end up doing about that.
Thank you for that response and that information. I guess we are out of time, and so I will turn it over to the student panel to close up our event for tonight.
Alrighty, so thank you, Representative Castro, and thank you for Raskin too, for taking the time to be here with us and answering all of our questions, and just taking the time out of your busy schedule. We know that you're very busy, and we really appreciate you coming over here and taking the time to spend time with us and our students and our community. We love all of the information. I was just taking some good notes. Thank you so much. We just can't thank you enough. We really can't. And we appreciate it. Thank you so much. You can go ahead and talk. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, I just want to say thank you. Thank you all for inviting me, and always glad to join anything Our Lady of the Lake University is doing. Like I said, it's a special place for me because my mom graduated from there. I grew up on the Deep West Side, not too far away from there, and it's still obviously in my congressional district. So however I can be helpful in the future, y'all just reach out. All right.
Thank you so much. You have yourself a good night.
Sure.
Thank you.
Y'all take care.
For all of you, if you want to know more about the events that we host for the Center for Mexican American Studies and Research, you can visit our Facebook page, and also you can email me directly. And thank you again for your time and attention.